Hello everyone, this is Claudio Lichtenthal, and today I will be showing you how I create a reactive application which consumes an API and then does some interacting with the user. Well, first let me show you the finished application. What we will write will look a lot like this. It was actually my daughter's idea, and it's all due to the pandemic that we are all experiencing now. She said, hey, let's say you have this specific food left in your fridge, and you want to find recipes which you can make with these ingredients. So let's say, for example, here I was to select chicken and pasta, maybe tomatoes, and I hit the button Find Recipes. This behind the scenes is calling an API. The API is returning as many, in my case I have a limit of 50, but it could be more results. So we're showing an image, we're showing the URL where the recipe is located, the amount of calories. There's all kinds of information that this recipe returns. And then I'm using some widgets available with the OutSystems platform to show this in a more interesting way. If I was to hit on the first title, I end up going to the actual recipe. So this is what we want to write today. Okay, so first things first, we go into Service Studio, and we're going to be writing a new application. It will be a reactive web application. I may want to upload an icon that makes sense for what we're doing. I give the application a name and I go into Create App. I'm at the Create Module screen. Press the button and I come into an empty application pretty much. I like to always write my applications from right to left, first dealing with the data. We need an entity or a table in which to hold the food filters which we will use. So I'm going to right click on database, add the table, call it food, and we need to add some columns, perhaps the name of the food, and I'm going to also add another attribute which I will use for the filter. So you will see that later when I use the radio buttons to select. I want this to be a boolean field. So we are done with the data tag, but before I go any further, I want you to notice that in structures I only have some of the basic structures that the module came with. We'll come back here after we consume the API and see how this has changed. I go into logic, and there's all kinds of things you can do, both with SOAP and REST. You can create REST APIs, but in our case, we're going to be consuming a REST API. Let me go back to the browser and show you the API that we'll be consuming. So this is the API that I'm using as an example. You can see I've already run it before, but I could change this. If I take some of the parameters out, we're going to get a different result set. But you notice that in here, this parameter will take a list of ingredients, and then I have some keys and other variables that I have to use as input. As output, I get a whole bunch of data, which the OutSystems platform will help me be able to filter and consume and parse. Let me look at some of these fields that come back, which are interesting. For example, I have an image of that food, so I'm going to be using that. I also have the URL to which to go back to, so keep that in mind. Now, another thing I have is a list of ingredients that this recipe will come back with. And there's a whole bunch of recipes that come back. So there's some iteration going on. Let's see, here we have another one. So let's consume this API. So I'm going to copy this into my clipboard and go back to Service Studio. If I had a Swagger file, I could consume all the methods, but here we're simply consuming one method. There's all kinds of ways to call APIs. We're going with a simple get. I'm going to paste the API in here. In this case, I have fixed fields. All of this can be parameters. I will just change one of this. Basically, the input parameter, I'll pass a string, a comma delimited string. So I'll be passing that. And then from here, I can test the API. If I go to headers, there's all kinds of headers that you can provide. Many times API requires other fields to be passed in the header before you call the API. Let's go into test. You see that it knows it's a parameter. So let's give it a chicken input field, and I hit test. And it calls the API, just like we did with the browser. But what's really nice is that here I can press copy to response body. And what that does is it creates everything I need. First of all, I have the API here with the search and the response. And notice that this is the data type that it comes back with. If I go back to structures, what wasn't there before is now here. And here I have a way. OutSystems gives me a way to drill down through all the data that this API will bring back to me. So back to our scheme of, we have the data, we're going to be entering some filter data. We call the API. Now we have to talk to the user. So let's go to the main flow of this application. You see there's now no screens here. I'm going to have just one screen, because in reactive applications you can do pretty much everything from one screen. And then, but I'm also going to create some screens to populate those filter screens. So let's bring in one panel. You see that there's different templates which you can base your screen off of, but in our case, let's just go with an empty screen. We have this screen, and maybe here we'll have some kind of a title. And what I want to do in this in my screen here is I want to separate the two different instances of me as a user dealing with the screen. One will be when I enter my filters, and the other one is when I get my results. A great way of separating things in a screen is containers, which are divs in HTML lingo. So I'm going to have two containers, and I like to give these containers names so that it's easier for me as a developer to, when I look at the widget tree, to know what's what, so I can drill down much easier. So in this container, I'm going to have my search. In this container, I'm going to have my results container. Now, I will be playing with a switch to determine which of these containers I'm showing. So let's create a switch, a local variable. I'm going to call it filters on, and I'm going to make sure that this is a Boolean type, and I'm going to default to true, because we're going to start with filters in here. And then we're going to be false and show results in here. So let's see. Now I need to show a list of those filters. So how do we show lists? Is by way of there's different ways, but a nice popular one is a list widget. So I come here and here I'm going to show a list. Now it doesn't know, the error we're getting is that it doesn't know where is my list coming from. So we're gonna come here in the search, and one thing that is gone from reactive apps is the preparation action. And here now what we can do is we can simply create data that is married to the screen, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm going to be fetching an aggregate. My aggregate will be bringing in my food. So now I have data that I can show in my screen. So now in here I need to tell it that the sort will be this get foods list. So the question now becomes, what is it that I want to show? Once again, I want to show, I want to use a container to separate the data. And there's many different ways here that they have to show data. Flip content was what I was showing you before, but there's many others. I'm just building from scratch, brick by brick. So I'm gonna just go with the container. If I look in here, a container, so per item, I'm gonna have a container. In the container, first of all, I wanna have some select mechanism, and I like this switch widget, so I drop it in there, and I'm gonna marry that variable to the Boolean that I have. And then the next thing I wanna do is I wanna show the name of the item that I'm filtering by. So I'm going to use an expression. I drop it in here. I drill into my data, and I'm going to be showing the name of the food. So I'm good with that. I may want to make this a little bit bigger to make it more interesting. So let's see. I have some colors available based on this schema of the icon, but I can do more. Let's make this a little bit bigger. So in here, I'm going to be selecting from this food. And then what I'm going to do is I need to call the API. So I need some sort of action. So I'm going to drop the actions here. Many ways of doing this. Let's look for a button. I grab a button. I drop it in here. The button, the text will be search, and let's and this button is complaining that it doesn't know where to go. Different ways that I can create actions. I can right click here and create actions, or I can just in this error on the on click, I can see my choices, and what I need to do is create a new action that is married to this screen. So when I press that button, I'm going to come here. Let's go back to the screen. Let's do a little navigation here. When I press this button, should only be showing when I want to show filters. So what I can do is I can, it's better to do it from here. I can insert this and close this in an if. The if will be based on the filters. So when the filters are on, when I want to show filters, I want to show this. Otherwise, I want to go to results. And when I'm showing results, I want to maybe come back here. So let's see a good way of showing it back. It could be a button, but in this case, let's use some of the icons that come with the with Service Studio. So I'm going to go back. I may make this a little bit bigger. And let's make this the color scheme more consistent. So when I press this, I'm going to go, I need to reset that switch. So I'm going to encapsulate this in a link, which will link to another action. So let's see, where is this action? So when I, let's say I may want to give this a better name, like go back to search, and what we need to do here is to reset that filters on to true. So I'm going to have an assignment. I bring the filter, and we want to be in filtering mode. So let's go back to the search. So we know that when they press the button for search, they're going to come here and they're going to call our API. So let's bring that API and I bring it in here. Let me make some room. We're going to call the this API, and to this API we're going to pass a string, a string of food. So I'm going to here create a local variable, and I'm going to call it search. And in here I'm going to have the logic, which basically iterates through the selection and appends to this search variable. Just to make this video faster, I already have that piece of code written, and I will explain it after I copy and paste it. So I'm going to copy this, come back here, paste it, and when we come in, we're going to go into this logic. So what are we doing here? First of all, we're making sure that search is blank, and we're going to iterate through the selection. Those that have a select true, we're going to come here. Here we have a basic is it the first time selection. So if it has nothing there, I need to append nothing with a comma, and then in here I'm appending the food to that variable. And at the end of this loop, I can call my API passing that variable to it. All right, that's great. So now that we have, we call the API, typically you would do some if logic, if it ran okay, if we got any results, etc. But let's take the happy path and assume we're getting output back. So I need a place to capture my output. Let's create a local variable with maybe call it search results, and notice that it didn't it defaults to a data type of text. I want this to use the structure that OutSystems created for us. Had I called it get search response, it would have defaulted to this type. So we have this is where we're gonna grab all the output that get search brings us back. Okay, so we call our API, and I want to capture the output. So let's say I want this to be equal to my response. So I have that output. The other thing I need to make sure I don't forget is to turn this to off, so that when we come back, we're going to look at the output. So I'm making this filter toggle. I'm going to make it false, so that we will show the results container. So I know that I'm going to come back, call the API, set that up, and then we're going to be coming back to the screen when I hit N. So let's go back to the screen. So I know that now what this container here, let's see, this container search should only be visible when filters is on, and the results container should only be visible when we're not in the filters on stage. So, and what is it that I want to show here? Well, once again, I want to show a list. So let's go grab a list. And what will my list be? So let's see what I have available. I see that I'm going to have that my output contains an iteration, so it figures from here that I could be showing that iteration. So let's show the output to the user. Once again, I like using containers. In the container, everybody loves images. Let's go get us an image, and I drop it in here. There's different kinds of images. In our case, it will be an external URL. I go through the data to see what potentially I want to use, and I know that this is the one that will have a URL where the image is. So we have the image. Let's see what can we place in here. Let's divide our output. We could put a container in here, and I'm going to make it a little bit smaller so it fits there. And I'm going to have an expression. My expression will be first of all, I'm gonna the name of the recipe, so which I know comes in the form of the label. So we're going to show a label, and then let's put in more data here. And once again, I'm going to make it fit in, but I'm going to make it fit below this. Let me make it bigger so it comes below. And so I'm going to have the label, and then I'm going to have, let's show the list of ingredients. So that's another list. So I'm going to put it in here, and let's see what will be my source. I don't see it here, so let's see what other possibilities I have. I know that I have the search results. If I open up the hits and the current, I see that a recipe has different lists in there. One of them is the ingredient lines. So we're going to show the ingredient lines, and let's have an expression here which will show the ingredient lines current line. I'm in the recipes. Inside the recipe, I have ingredient lines, so we're going to be showing the current one. Now this, the label, I want this to be a little bit bigger, so I'm going to change that to maybe 24 and make it a better and more interesting color. So I go with that. One thing we want to show is, or allow the users, that when they press that label, they can go to that URL. So I right click, and I'm going to link to, and I want to link to a redirect to URL. And in here, I need to tell it where am I going to. And in the URL field, I see that there's a URL name for that variable. So that works out nicely. We have everything we need to deal with the API. But what we need to do is create some screens for the user or the administrator to add content, add filters. So let's go into the main flow, and let's create two quick scaffoldings here. One that shows a list of food, and also food detail. So now that we have the mechanism to add filters to our search, let's publish our application. Go to our browser, and there's nothing in here in the list because there's no food. So let's go to the food list. Let's add some food. Now we have a list of food. So let's go back to our recipe, and let's in here you would have a long list of ingredients, but let's say we are looking for chicken and pasta, and I press search to call the API. Now I have a list of all the different recipes that were found with our filter criteria, and if I press on the first one, I should go back to the link where that recipe is found step by step. Thank you very much for watching.